Well, it's nothing but good news. There could be some bad news in this, depending on what you want to happen on November 5. But at 8:20 on a Monday morning, thanks for being here on KCMO. This is the first time in the last 30 years that Republicans have led on party identification during the third quarter of a presidential year. Gallup has been doing this poll since 1992, asking U.S. adults their party identification and leanings in a presidential election year. And back in 1992, 52% of adults said they were Democratic or leaned Democratic, compared to 40% who said they were Republican. And Republicans have trailed on this issue for the better part of, going back 32 years now at this point. Back in 2000, it was still Democrats in the lead by a couple of points. In 2004, it was tied. Both parties had about 47% of U.S. adults who identified with them. But then in 2008, there was a big gap between Obama and McCain, of course, that year. And Democrats have held that lead for the last 15 years. Well, right now, per this Gallup poll, 48% of U.S. adults identify as Republican or lean Republican. 45% of Democrats or 45% of U.S. adults identify as Democrats or lean Democratic. So this is the first time since this poll began in 1992 that at this point in a presidential year, more U.S. adults are identifying as Republican. That is outstanding news. And by the way, you look at some of the more granular data, and U.S. adults trust the Republican Party to keep America prosperous by a 50-44 margin. U.S. adults trust the Republican Party to keep America safe from international threats on a 54-40 margin. These are big, big numbers for the Republican Party going into a presidential year with 36 days to go. But then look at the polling. It's neck and neck. So there are two ways to look at this. One way is, wow, Republicans are in a great position 5 weeks out until the election. That's outstanding news if you want to see Donald Trump win, right? I mean, they have not had this kind of a position going into a presidential race in 32 years since this Gallup poll started. That's outstanding. The other side of the coin here is, well, if Donald Trump doesn't win, what does that say? If all the trends suggest that U.S. adults, and therefore many voters, want to be Republicans, prefer Republicans, and trust them on major issues like the economy and the safety of the American people, then why are they not voting for him? Or at least at the top of the ticket, why are they not voting for him? Is it really just TDS, Trump derangement syndrome on steroids? Or is it something else? Is there something else going on here? And depending on how November 5th plays out, we're going to be able to look back on this moment and this poll and come to a conclusion that if Trump wins, well, you know what? We'll argue that people are maybe seeing the best way forward, economically speaking and foreign policy speaking and safety-wise tied into the border, is the way of the Republican Party. And then if he loses, we're going to sit there and say, what the heck? All the trends favor the party and the guy loses once again. What is that all about? And then you'll come to a conclusion, or at least I'll probably come to the conclusion, that as much as people love the ideas that Donald Trump has brought to the party and brought to the American people, he's no longer the most effective messenger of those ideas. He was in 2016. He may not be anymore. But that will be contingent on what happens on November 5. 913-408-7957. But there's overall a ton of good news coming out of this, along with, poor approval for Joe Biden in this Gallup poll that showed him at 39%. And theoretically, that should also impact Kamala Harris. Let's go to Stephen. He's in KCK. What's up, Steve? You're on KCMO. Good morning.
Good morning. A good victory Monday, even if we have a few injuries. It's an excellent topic. I was looking at the polls this weekend as well. I think it's a combination of two things. I think it's gaslighting on the women's reproductive rights / abortion issue. If you look at the way they're attacking Josh Hawley, and also I think it's people are fed up with wokeness and the death of wokeness. I was shocked that there was no bounce from the Taylor Swift endorsement. That Taylor Swift in the polls has actually gone down in favorability, something like 7 or 8 points since she came out. So that, I mean, there was an article in Newsweek saying about how one of the starlets, had identified a niche. I think it was Sydney Sweeney on that live, and Newsweek kind of said that a conservative hot girl or something, that they were saying this is becoming a trend, that she's playing against wokeness, that she said she wanted to be featured as someone who is a sexy movie star. So I think we've reached the breaking point of wokeness, and the only thing they have left is gaslighting on abortion. So, I mean, I thought that was fascinating that it looks like the conservatives are sort of reclaiming the media.
Yeah,
Do you think that's possible?
I don't think they're reclaiming the media. I think they're reclaiming common sense, and they're cutting through it with social media. Thank you, Steve. I think that's what's happening here as well. They are cutting through the nonsense that you get fed on a daily basis by more mainstream traditional media outlets, and they're doing it effectively with social media, which is where most people are now getting their news. Now, you'll come to shows like this and podcasts and look for your analysis and entertainment of the news, right? And that's what we do in large part. But in terms of just getting the news, I mean, who's sitting there waiting for that 5:30, 6 o'clock national news broadcast from Lester Holt or David Muir? I mean, who is doing that in 2024? Come on. Nobody's doing that. So it's more about, yes, I think that, Stephen, you're right. I think that there's something to be said for people being fed up with the wokeness angle. But I think a lot of it, too, is just people realizing that whatever the stock market is, and that's why the stock market's never something that any president should brag about. I said this during the Trump years. Don't brag about the stock market. Don't brag about the stock market. It really doesn't have any impact on you. Same thing right now. Wall Street is not Main Street. Now, all of us have investments, right? 401ks, IRAs, things like that, which it's great when the markets go up. Certainly, I'm happy about that, as I know many of you are. But the way I look at it is, okay, I'm glad that my investments are going up, and I hope that many of yours are going up. But I also say, how much more could I put into those investments if I hadn't been hit with a 20% cost hike thanks to inflation the last 3 years, right? And that's how to look at it. And that's what the American people are feeling. And a lot of people maybe even can't invest right now due to the fact that most of their paycheck is going to everyday necessities. And that's what's being lost on the other side of the aisle in that conversation as well. 913-408-7957. Another massive trend that could change the way 24 plays out next. You got these trends that keep dropping over the weekend. I mean, you're 35, 36 days to go until November 5, and all these polls come out. And yes, we can have a poll out today, says Trump up 1, Harris up 1, whatever. All that stuff is oftentimes dependent on who the pollsters are and what the polls are trying to signal, right? You can make a poll tell you whatever you want it to tell you. But when I see trends in specific demographics that are not like within margin of errors and are part of a broader multi-year trend that you are seeing in American politics, that is something that stands out to me. And that's exactly what you saw over the weekend in a new NBC News, Telemundo, CNBC national poll. No relation, by the way. Kamala Harris maintaining a 14-point lead over Donald Trump with Latino voters. This would dwindle the Democrats' advantage with Latino voters to the lowest level seen in 4 presidential cycles, a new poll has found. So take a listen to this overall trend. NBC News analyzing this yesterday on Meet the Press, And here's what it sounded like.
We ask a basic question of Hispanic voters. Which party do you more identify with? 37% now say Republicans, 49% say Democrats. But again, look at how this has shifted in just the last dozen years. In 2012, this was a 41-point advantage for the Democrats. It has come all the way down to 12 points, Kristen, a 29-point drop in terms of that gap there on which party Hispanics identify with in just 12 years.
I think I could hear the crying in the back room from NBC's broadcast center. Could you hear those whimpers and tears? The mics weren't meant to be hot back there, but I could hear they were starting to get the sniffles back there at NBC. The OWWs, as I call them, are stunned by this. The overeducated woke whites. They can't understand how this is possible. They've done everything in their power to try to cater to these individuals because they view people as just voting blocks, right? It's like, Latinos and blacks and whites and non-college whites and college whites. Like, they just break people down based on these weird socioeconomic, racial, gender lines. But the reality is, first off, I think the Democratic Party thought in large part Latino voters would love their open border policies. And they would say, well, these people kind of look like us, so we want to let them in the country. Well, first off, it doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what you look like. Most people see what's going on, and if you're an American citizen, whether you're white, black, Asian, Latino, you look at this and you say, how is this any way to run a country? And then if you're someone who's at the working class level or below the working class level, down the working poor or in poverty, you're far more likely to get impacted by this. You're more likely to be somebody who is competing for a rental property with these individuals. You're potentially competing for a job with said individuals. You're the one who's getting impacted. It's not, folks in Prairie Village or Leawood or places like that, or, Johnson County at large. It is individuals who have struggled the most over the last 3 years, who have felt the impacts of the cost of inflation on the American voter and the American citizen. They're the ones who also are suffering the most when it comes to competition for jobs, for rental units. They're the ones who get impacted the most. And whether you're Latino or not, you look at that and you say to yourself, Is that really the future I want for America? Is that really the best way forward if you are currently an American citizen? And we all come from immigrants, whether it's a generation ago, 2 generations ago, 3 generations ago. It doesn't really matter, right? We all come from immigrants. You can be sympathetic and want great immigrants to come to America. Who doesn't? I do. You should. I mean, why not? We all come from them. But the policies of the last 3.5 years have been completely untenable, to the point where Latino voters in particular are not like, they're coming from Central America and maybe I've got some Central American ancestry. So, just keep the door wide open. Only in academia and on cable news broadcasts would that be something where somebody would make the argument and think that it makes sense. So now you look at these numbers here, and the fact that Latino voters only favor Democrats 54-42 is a stunning reversal from 2020, when Democrats had a 33-point advantage in the presidential election. In 2016, they had a 38-point advantage, and in 2012, they had a 44-point advantage. Now, with all that being said, where's the Democratic Party making up ground? That is with white college-educated voters, the OWW class. So that's where they're making up a lot of ground. And that's why they're doubling down on ideas like bailing out student loans, right? If they can get people in the colleges and then get them into degrees where they have absolutely no skill set when they get to the real world, and then promise student loan bailouts, well, guess what? They're basically buying voters. They're buying people to put them on the payroll is what they're doing. That's why they're totally fine with the ongoing scam that is higher education. If you wanted to fix the problem, You wouldn't bail out the student loans because bailing out the loans does nothing about the cost of college itself. It actually might just keep increasing the cost of college. But the kid who walks in the freshman year this year at KU, K-State, or Mizzou gets no benefit from student loans being bailed out for people that graduated 5, 10, 15 years ago. And deep down they know that, but they don't really care. Because it's more about keeping the scam and the grift going where they can keep pretending or acting like they care and then try to buy people's votes on the backside. And then when it doesn't happen, what can they do? They can blame the Republican Party. That's how this cycle just continues, right? Get people more reliant on government, and then when they can't use the government to print more dollars that we don't have, to then help them, as I put up my air quotes, they can point the finger and say, look at that guy. He doesn't want to help you out. Instead of actually analyzing how we got here to begin with and trying to figure out a solution that helps everybody, not just buys you some votes for the upcoming elections. But whether it's the woke policies, whether it's the student loan bailouts, that also doesn't appeal to working class voters who are white, black, and Latino across the board. They don't really care about these student loan bailouts. A lot of them maybe didn't go to college and don't want to bail out the basket weaving major. They're realizing, gosh, maybe there is a different way forward. And then don't overlook the religious element as well. Don't overlook the fact that with the party, the Democratic Party playing largely up the issue of abortion, you look at the Latino community at large, and I speak in generalities when I say this, but you have a demographic that is much more religious, and many of them are Catholics, than what you see in parts of secular America. And the Democratic Party that is basically a secular political party, their God is themselves, their God is the government. I think there are a lot of folks who, as that party brands itself as the party of abortion on demand, Latino Catholics in particular are going to look at that and say, you know, that's not attractive to me. What are you guys selling me exactly? Preserving democracy, whatever that means, and abortion on demand? You know, I may not love this Trump guy, but I know I'm not on board with that. And that appears to be part of this realization that is happening. And that's why I think these polls are showcasing the way they are right now. The question is, can Trump get himself across the finish line? And that, of course, remains to be seen.